Welcome to NOAA Live. My name is Nicole Bartlett, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is sponsored by NOAA's Regional Collaboration Network, where I work, which is spread across the country and helps connect people to all that NOAA does. It's also sponsored by Woods Hole Sea Grant, which is located at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution here on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. This series is designed to help you get to know NOAA and some of our incredible experts. All of our speakers work for some part of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. During the month of March, the NOAA Heritage Program is helping us take you behind the scenes at 6 different NOAA facilities during our Open House Series. We will travel, virtually of course, across the country to showcase some of the amazing places where our scientists, engineers, educators, technicians, interns work today. Today, we're visiting NOAA's Satellite Operations Facility in Suitland, Maryland. While we'll be showing you where NOAA operates our constellation of satellites, we want to recognize that we are all coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. We acknowledge that our speakers today are coming to us from the lands of the Piscataway people. We're hosting this webinar from the ancestral lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead Aquina. A few guidelines before I hand you over to our speakers. You're all muted because we have a lot of people on the line and want to make sure everyone can hear our speakers. However, there is a box where you can write questions. Please let us know if you're a class tuning in, and if there are multiple people watching, let us know who's asking the question. We encourage you to ask them as we go, and I will be keeping track for everyone. They'll stop now and then and answer a few. We may not get to all your questions, but we're going to try and answer as many as we can. And now I'm going to introduce you to my friend, Greg.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the NOAA Satellite Operations Facility. I'm Director Greg Marlowe, and we're very excited to have you attend our virtual tour to learn more about satellites and the data and the services they provide. This building is where over 800 people operate and support our 16 satellites. Our satellite operations facility is located in the Washington, D.C. area in Suitland, Maryland, which is on the east coast of the United States. We hope you enjoy this event and learn a lot. Our virtual tour guide, Mr. Chris Cisco, will now talk to you about satellite operations and satellite antennas at our building, where our people are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Greg. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Cisco, and I'll be your first virtual tour guide today. I'm a meteorologist here at the NOAA Satellite Operations Facility. And long ago, when I was about 8 years old, I actually kind of got my first glimpse and start at being a scientist or meteorologist when I saw a very big tornado when I was out camping with my family. And then today, of course, once in a while, usually once a year, I dress up as a mad scientist, and with all the kids that come in just for one day, we get to do cool experiments. However, today we're going to talk to you about satellites, and more importantly, we're going to give you kind of an exclusive insight into our satellite operations, and also give you a special view of our rooftop where we have a lot of satellite antennas. So let's go ahead and start with our tour. But first, we'll talk a little bit about satellites before we actually go on that tour. So let's go ahead and do that. So NOAA's got a lot of satellites. Usually they do weather and environmental monitoring. We have polar satellites, geostationary satellites, and a deep space satellite. The polar satellites are pretty close to Earth, about 500 miles away from the surface, and they do observations close up. The geostationary satellites are further out, more than 20,000 miles away, and they stay over one single point. And then over 1 million miles away, it's amazing, we actually have a deep space satellite that's exclusively used for space weather monitoring, so it can warn us if there's any serious solar activity. But as you can see, there's actually a lot of satellites out there, and we've actually at a point where now we actually have to control them, tell them what to do, and make sure they're doing their day-to-day job of monitoring the Earth and keeping us safe from weather hazards and other environmental hazards. So let's move ahead and go into our satellite operations, and we'll take that exclusive tour as we move along. So here we go. So this is Tom today. He's starting his shift. And as you can see, he's walking down the hallway. And what he normally will do just to get into satellite operations facility, he's got a special badge in which he unlocks the door. Because it is a secure facility, Tom will go in and he's going to start his day actually running a polar satellite. And what I'm going to do right now is go ahead and just pause for a second. And I want everyone who's either watching or in a classroom, take a look at the very far wall. You'll see a couple images there. I don't want you to guess right now, but just think about it because we'll see it again. Is I want you to think about what does that shape look like? This is what our satellite was seeing about almost 2 years ago when this film video was taken. So we'll see this again and we'll let Tom continue his way onto his satellite post. So here goes Tom. And as I mentioned, Tom's working on one of the polar satellites today in this video, and it's called POSE. And I'll stop and just describe a little bit about what he's doing as he's sitting down here. So Tom is sitting down at his workstation, and he's got a number of monitors. And what he's doing is he's watching the health and safety of the satellite when it's in view of a satellite antenna. And also he's looking for alarms, looking for anything out of the norm. And also he's commanding the satellite to go ahead and send us data, and also he'll send special commands to it to tell it what to do if there's a special activity going on. So that's his normal day job. And what he's doing, he's actually working 12 hours a day. He's on a 12-hour shift, and then others replace him to fill in the next 12-hour shift. So this is going on 24 hours a day, all year long. So they're monitoring these satellites, making sure they're healthy, and then working along. So let's go ahead and keep proceeding in satellite operations, and we'll leave Tom. And what I'll do is go back just a little bit and give you another view, a better view of those two images. Again, if you want to drop in the chat box what you think that image is, and this is happening on Earth about 2 years ago when we were filming this, go ahead and drop that in there if you think you know what that weather feature is. Okay, let's go ahead and continue over to the other side of satellite operations. And here we're seeing Antoine. He's actually working on a satellite called GOES. And he's looking at the entire instruments that are operating on that satellite. We have Earth-facing instruments, and we also have space weather instruments. And you can see there's just a huge amount of computer screens here because there's a lot of things to monitor when it comes to satellites. And you can see it's quite busy. He's checking all the numbers and then looking at the different health of the instruments and also the production of the satellites. And as we pan over, you can see all kinds of different images coming from the satellites. And they're usually from different image channels that the satellite can see. And Marshall is also doing the same thing. He's helping out Antoine today, and they're pretty busy monitoring, and he's looking for different quality features on the image and making sure everything looks normal so when it goes to the forecasters. And now we're over into another area where there's a lot more of the observations and the products coming out of these satellites. And as you can see, there's so much to monitor that the team is pretty busy watching this. And of course, now we'll pan over to see one of our engineers, Mary, and we'll stop with Mary right now. And what Mary's doing is she's not a satellite controller, but she's an engineer who's actually running special tests and checkouts for one of the programs that are running on the satellite and also on the systems. And usually people will come and go to help the satellite controllers through their day and also do special operations or other activities when we need to do that. So that kind of gives you an inside glimpse of how our satellite operations works. And then we'll say goodbye to Mary. And then of course, we'll go ahead and proceed on and go up to a special tour of the roof. But before we do that, we'll go ahead and see if there's any questions from the audience. Go ahead and drop those in the chat box and we'll see if you have any quick comments or questions, we'll do that. And of course, what you see up here today is another view of our satellite operations. We do have a launch control room here also in the building where we launch new satellites, and they'll take over and they'll do the final checkout. It usually takes us several months to 6 months to do that. And then of course, on the bottom left, you can see a good size comparison of how some of these satellites are. They're pretty big when you see the person in the clean room next to the solar array, so you get a good perspective. These are not very small satellites. They're very capable satellites that we use to monitor the weather and the environment. So let's see if there's any questions to go to, and before we move on to the tour of the roof.
Great, Chris. We do have some questions. So
Sure.
first question from Christina is, what kind of engineer is Mary?
Mary's basically a systems engineer on the ground system, and she's working on the product side for GOES, and she's doing those checkouts.
Great.
Great question.
We did get a lot of people saying that that was a hurricane. I don't think you fooled anybody. We even had someone suggest which hurricane it was. Would you like to know what that guess was? We've got a couple. One person says,
let's hear. And the truth of the matter is, I don't even think I know which hurricane it is. It is from 2019. And
right.
I've worked hurricanes for a number of years, but let's hear the guesses.
Okay, well, we've got Hurricane Dorina and Hurricane Finn are the two specifics that we asked. That were asked. Oh, someone says Dorian too. So we've got
Dorian.
Yeah, or maybe
Yeah.
that was Dorian. Maybe that was just a typo. I have never heard of Hurricane Dorina, but maybe that was meant to be Dorian as well.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
So we got a good question that I think folks might be interested in hearing your answer to here. Let me just scroll back up because it came in very at the beginning. So does the National Weather Service have their own satellites, or are they dependent on all of the NOAA satellites from which to receive data?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Weather Service is part of NOAA. That comprises of different forecast offices, as well as the Hurricane Center, Aviation Weather Center, number across the U.S., as well as Alaska, Hawaii, and territories, Guam, American Samoa, Puerto Rico. And they're very dependent upon us, NOAA's Satellite and Information Service, to run those satellites for them, so they're getting the information from us, and then they can focus on the weather forecast, and we can focus on operating these satellites so they can have those critical observations. So that's an excellent question. Great question.
Okay, another quick one from Rashawn. He wants to know, is it possible to see other planets with our satellites?
Not in any detail, but what we do have is the Discover spacecraft. That's the one I talked about that was deep space. And while it's looking at the sun and trying to determine if there's solar flares or other geomagnetic storms or radiation storms occurring that can affect satellites and power grids, the satellite also has some sensors looking back at the Earth, usually the day side. And what we do see is the moon will do a drive-by, and at times the sensors, the visible sensors, will see the Earth. And typically, it's a pretty neat photo when you get to see that when that occurs. So typically not other planets, but yes, most certainly close in near Earth, including our moon.
Okay, well, we have a lot of questions, more than we can answer, so I apologize for the folks that I don't get to.
Great questions.
Yeah, Norma wanted to know how many people work in the launch control room at one time?
Usually there's two sides to the launch control room, and there could be anywhere up to 50 to 75 people, depending on the launch campaign. So usually we're getting ready to launch one in December, and those teams will come on board. And as we get closer to launch, there'll be more people at the facility that Greg manages, my director. And that'll be the GOES T-launch. And great question. So it becomes a lot of people involved in a launch campaign.
Let's move on to the roof, and I'm going to hold a couple of these questions for our next break.
All right. So the next part of this virtual tour is I rarely get to go up to the roof, so you'll get a good chance of seeing the roof and what's up there. So we'll go ahead and start this. Bill is one of our people who works for us, and he does support, and he has the key to the roof, so he's going to show us all the satellite antennas on the roof. As you can see here, there's a number of satellite antennas. They're actually pretty good sized. And at our facility, we just receive data. We're not talking to the satellites through these satellite antennas. And here you see a technician, he's actually doing maintenance on the satellite antenna or the dish area. So he's going to move his platform over so he can get closer access to it. But you can see just by how big he is that this satellite antenna or the dish part is very big. And usually they'll have to do a lot of routine maintenance to make sure they're keeping them function. It does take a large team to do all this activity, not just fly them. And then of course, we'll pan back again and take a look at all the satellite dishes. But before we do that, I just want to ask another quick question. You can drop it in the chat box if you wish, and we'll keep running through a little bit more. But if you look at these satellite antennas, it looks like they're pointed in different directions. So why is that? Why are they pointed? And I'll give you another clue. They're all facing south toward the equator. That's another clue if you have a more sophisticated answer. But go ahead and drop in there why you think they're pointed in different directions. So we'll let this video run through a little bit more and get you another view of the satellite antennas on our roof, and we have a number of them. These are the most common size and receiving data from one of our big satellites. And there we go. And as soon as we see a little bit more of the satellite antenna, I'll go back and show you that picture of where they're pointed in different directions, and we'll go ahead and see what kind of answers we have.
Well, you're not, I told you, Chris, this is a savvy crew. You're not going to be able to fool them.
Oh, I was hoping I would have a good question, but we have more questions ahead.
We've got to receive data they're directed towards specific satellites, says OLA, and they receive data from different satellites in different orbits to, let's see, because the satellites are sending a signal from different areas. So let's see, to catch data from all directions, says Aiden. But yeah, I think a lot of the folks are saying, and Sean just says, because that's where the satellites are. They're pointed at the satellites.
Yes, that's exactly it. They're pointed at a specific satellite. And in fact, because they're pointed southward toward the equator, the one closest to you on your right is actually pointed at goes west. That's in between California and Hawaii. So that's monitoring the West Coast as well as Hawaii and the Pacific area. And then if you look, the one that's a little further away, that's actually pointed at goes east, which is out well past the East Coast and close to Puerto Rico. And that's monitoring the eastern portion of the US. So we use 2 geostationary satellites to cover that area around the clock. So yes, yep, that's exactly what it is. It's pointed at a specific satellite. And since these are geostationary and not moving with respect to where we are, these pretty much stay fixed. Other satellites that are polar orbiting, they'll move across the sky, and these antennas would track it and follow it while it's receiving data until it moves out of sight. So, wow, this is a very smart group. It's going to be a big challenge for the other guides as they ask their questions. So we'll see as we go through. But yep, great group. So, all right, so we'll move on to just one trivia question before I depart and pass off to the next virtual tour guide. But here's our trivia question for you. NOAA has a lot of satellite antennas, especially at different locations, even worldwide, that we use and leverage. But this is one of NOAA's largest satellite antennas. How many yellow school buses do you think span across the satellite dish, across this part? You can use clues like this little shack right here would fit a person, but you can tell. Take a moment to think about that.
Well, we're getting a lot of guesses right away. So we've got everything from 20 by Jane to 8 from Brendan to 27 by Stacy to 10, 3, 4, 8, 45 says Norma.
45, that's pretty big.
Grace says 30. Yeah, so we're getting a lot of variability. Yeah,
for our international viewers, if you want to guess in meters, that's fine too. I know this is kind of a guessing game, not quite a trivia question, but I'll go ahead and I think we might have gotten you here a little bit, but that's okay. Actually, it's about 2 school buses end to end. So you can imagine one big school bus here, one big school bus here, or about 26 meters for our international friends. So that's pretty big. That's a big antenna. We have some smaller scale antennas beside that that are newer models, of course. But this is one of our older, very largest satellite antenna, looking at some of the deep space satellites that we utilize and leverage. But Yeah, wow, excellent. So very good guesses. I like it. So that kind of gives you a feeling for all our satellite operations that we have here. You got to saw just a brief glimpse of how we get the data through our satellite antennas. But now here's a key point. Once we get all this data, what do you do with it? And the next virtual tour guide, she's going to actually tell you how that happens. And with this, we've got Ellen. She's going to walk you through the application of the data. So over to you, Ellen.
Thank you very much, Chris. Wow, 2 whole school buses can fit into the satellite dish. That is amazing. I'm Ellen Ramirez. I'm a physical scientist with NOAA, which means I work on, I'm in the satellite analysis branch, and I'm using this data to monitor different hazards and disasters. And I will be your tour guide for this segment. So you might be wondering how I came to have this job in NOAA. So here's a little bit of my backstory. As a young student, I was interested in science and experiments. I was interested in space travel and perhaps becoming an astronaut. I was interested in the outdoors, including hiking and camping. And additionally, I grew up in Wichita Falls, Texas, which falls within the corridor that's known as Tornado Alley. So in Wichita Falls, back in 1979, there was a deadly tornado outbreak that spawned a tornado that had a base of over half of a mile wide. And that's over 60 school buses lined up end to end. And so I became fascinated with severe weather. And so later on, when I went to college, I opted to study meteorology and atmospheric science. So currently in NOAA, I work in the satellite analysis branch. And I'm using data to monitor different hazards and disasters, including hurricanes, wildfires, marine debris, and oil spills. So here's what it looks like at a typical day in the office. This is my workstation. I sit behind several computer screens analyzing the satellite imagery and weather data as it comes in. And this is what I might see on one of my computer screens. So underneath this red dot in the satellite loop, there is a natural disaster that's occurring. Can you guess what that natural disaster is?
All right, what do we think, folks? Anybody got an idea? Oh, so we're getting a lot of wildfires. Let's see. Wow. Well, I can almost, they're coming in so fast, I can't even attribute it to somebody, but let's see. Natalia thinks it might be a snowstorm. Amanda says a blizzard. A lot of people are guessing wildfires. Yeah, and Janet says a mudslide. Tsunami, says Stacy. Is that right? And then let's see. Irene even thinks it might be a flash flood. So I think you got to help us out here, Ellen. Lots of variability.
Those are excellent guesses, but this is a volcanic eruption. And inside that red polygon, you're seeing the extent of the volcanic ash. So you might be asking yourself, why does NOAA monitor volcanic ash? Do you think it's A, it makes a really cool looking cloud? B, it's dangerous for airplanes? C, it teaches us about patterns and eruptions? Or D, it can impact air quality?
All right, so right out of the gate, we're getting a lot of B's. Audrey says D. Annalisa says A and D. Oh, we've got a handful of folks are saying all of the above, including Deb and Thomas. So what do you think?
Okay, so this is a bit of a trick question. There are multiple correct answers here, but for this presentation, the best answer is B, volcanic ash is dangerous for airplanes. Did you know that if a plane flew through a volcanic ash cloud, it can cause the plane engines to fail completely? So that's pretty scary, right? So take a look at this map from flightaware.com. It's a snapshot showing how many planes are currently in transit in the southeast US and in Mexico and in central America. So it's hundreds at a time. And so if you were on one of these planes, your pilot would know where there are active volcanoes, and he would be using information about eruptions to route your plane around that ash cloud so you would avoid an encounter with it and everyone stays safe. So volcanoes are being monitored on a 24/7 basis all over the world by 9 different volcanic ash advisory centers. And 2 of these centers are within NOAA. One is located in Anchorage, and they monitor the volcanoes in the area that's shaded in blue. And in the red polygon, the center is in the Washington, D.C. area, and that's where I work. Inside the red shaded area, there are 65 active volcanoes. And within that region, one of the most active areas is Mexico. So say hello to Colima volcano on the left and Popocatépetl volcano on the right. And what's unique about this day is there were 2 simultaneous eruptions close by each other, and collectively they caused major disruptions in air travel in and out of Mexico City. So for this next segment, I wanted to show you what it looks like when we're responding to an eruption in real time. That was Kilauea volcano that had the lava fountain at the beginning of the video. And normally that's the extent of the eruption. It's lava and there's no ash threat. But back in 2018, there was an explosive eruption that sent an ash column 30,000 feet above sea level. And so we jumped into action. We started producing text and graphical products and using weather information to assign and estimate how high that ash was reaching in the atmosphere. And then we used the satellite data to determine the direction of the ash plume and its extent. So now that you're an expert in looking at volcanic ash eruptions in satellite, I have one final test for you. Each colored dot represents an active volcano in Guatemala, and one of them is erupting. Do you think it's the volcano under the yellow, the green, the red, or the blue dots?
All right. Oh, I think you did really well in your explanation, Ellen, because I'm getting nothing but red here in the chat box. Isabella says it's red. Natalie says it's red. Everyone agrees it's red, Ellen. Is that right?
That's correct. Great job in your assessment, everyone. It is the red dot. That is Fuego volcano, and the ash is identifiable by the dark colored cloud. So now I will be happy to take any questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So Ingrid had a question. She wanted to know why you have so many computers.
That's a great question. So we're looking at satellite data on one screen, we're looking at weather information on another, but we also monitor webcams, we monitor seismic information. So we're using a bunch of different data sources, but satellite information is one of our main indicators of an eruption.
Duncan would like to know, what's your favorite part of your job?
My favorite part of my job is being able to watch and monitor the hazards themselves. I've always been fascinated with natural disasters, and I can have one position and monitor many different types of natural disasters.
Great. Isabella would like to know, how many volcanoes typically erupt in one year?
Dozens, hundreds worldwide, but we produce around 1,000 volcanic ash advisories in a single year. So we're one of the busier centers.
Well, a follow-up from Aiden, I'm sorry, on the computer question. So if you're using those monitors to see everything, how do you control all those different computers? How do you know what's on every screen and who decides?
Yeah, that's because our chairs have wheels and we can move very fast from one computer screen to another. So it's something that you just become trained to do. It is a lot of monitors to keep track of, but the advisories only go out on one machine. So you're looking at a lot of information, but you're really only driving one of those workstations.
Great. Let's see, let me pick one more here. Katya in Juneau wants to know, how high can the smoke rise?
Tens of thousands of feet. I think the biggest eruption that I worked went to about 50,000 feet above sea level.
Wow, that is high. All right, well, we're gonna save, I do wanna find out if there is a way for the public to view these images anywhere. Is there any live coverage when these eruptions occur?
Yes, a lot of these webcams are open source if you prefer this type of view that's on the screen right now. But otherwise, when we send out our own satellite-based products, they're also available on the internet.
Great. Well, thank you, Ellen. It looks like we're gonna have some questions for you at the end. So I'll let
Okay.
you, I'll let you take a short break.
Excellent. The next segment will be on using satellite data for satellite-aided search and rescue. Over to you, Jesse.
Thanks, Ellen. So Ellen mentioned how NOAA data products can save lives. Let's learn a little bit more about another NOAA satellite system that can also save lives almost every day. That system is called the Search and Rescue Satellite Aided Tracking. But first, my name's Jesse Reich, and when I was young, I also enjoyed the outdoors, math, science, and really liked taking things apart and figuring out how they worked, and then sometimes even getting them to go back together again. So I'm very fortunate now to work on this very complex and great system known as SARSAT. So SARSAT was actually born in the early 80s, about the same time as I was, and it came about as an effort from the United States, Canada, France, and Russia to determine how these weather satellites could also be used for other missions. Saving people's lives was one of those potential other missions. Since that time, in almost 40 years, it saved nearly 50,000 people worldwide. In the US alone, it saved over 9,400 people. And this year alone, even just up to February 19th, it helped to save 30 people's lives. So how does this system work? And how do the people actually that are in distress get their lives saved? Here's a graphic that shows people when they're in distress, whether it's on land or in a boat that is sinking or having issues, or in a plane crash, they activate a very special beacon that is transmitted up to the NOAA satellites, where it's received and captured and then sent down to ground stations, which is what I work on. From there, we send it to the MCC, which is located at the NOAA Satellite Operations Facility. On the next slide, we can see what it looks like at the Mission Control Center. We have Jamal, who's working right here, and he or another controller are working 24/7 to monitor the system, identify any anomalies if the system has problems, and work with some of the rescuers for particularly tricky rescue cases. Now, there's also another 25 and more people that work not on a 24/7 basis, but they do work to make sure that the system is up 24/7 and working in an automated fashion. In most cases, or I should say in many cases, a beacon can go off and be captured and sent to the rescue authorities in under a few minutes. So what kind of a special beacon does it take? Well, here we have some graphics that show these beacons. There's various types. There's the kinds that can work on boats. You can see those there. And I think Chris will be able to demonstrate a little bit as well what the beacons look like in person. There's the beacons that also are handheld. So if you're hiker or in the wilderness, you can carry a smaller beacon with you right there. And there's also beacons that we don't have, but that are specially made for airplanes, which are able to detect a crash and then activate automatically. In many cases, this is actually the last line of communication for people who are in grave danger. So now I have a question for everyone. Why do all these beacons, why are they all yellow?
Oh, that's a good question. So let's see. Audrey right away says it's because it's easy to see. And Nora agrees. Visibility. And Julian says it's because yellow is cool. Teresa thinks it's because it can glow in the dark. And Anna Maria thinks they might be fluorescent, so that's kind of the same point. And Ricardo thinks it's so they can be seen at night.
Yep, all great answers. And yes, it is the visibility, and it's not just from the rescuers who are coming to try to save the people, but the people themselves might be in a distress situation where they have to grab that beacon in a hurry. So yes, the yellow is a highly visible color. So what happens when a person's in distress and they activate their beacon? Well, here we have a video where once the beacon goes off, this was a case 50 miles off the Outer Banks, where the beacon was activated, went through the satellites to the MCC, and the MCC knew to contact the proper rescue authority. In this case, it was the Coast Guard in the area. So the rescue helicopter arrived on scene and found 3 people hanging onto a cooler. I don't think we actually see that in this case, but we do see 2 other people that are inside a life raft being lifted up into the helicopter themselves. And towards the end, you can even see this, the one gentleman, and they're all very, very happy to be in the helicopter. But you can even see the one gentleman still holding on to the beacon that helped to save his life. So in this case, it was the Coast Guard that the signal went to. There's the beacon, if you can see it. But in many other cases, it might be state police or park rangers who are the appropriate rescue authorities. So how does the signal get from the ground up through? Well, we have a graphic here that just shows that same case off of the Outer Banks, North Carolina. And as the NOAA satellites go overhead, the signal went up and went through the satellites down to the various ground stations, at which point it was processed and sent to the rescue authorities. And I believe we have one other picture here of some very happy people to be alive, thanks to the NOAA satellite system, which again helps to save their lives. And in last year alone, it was over 300 people. So almost one person a day had their life saved by this system. Now I've gone through a general overview of the system, but I'll be happy to take any questions.
So if you could back up one slide, Chris, for Jesse, I think you were mentioning to me what that means, a vessel running aground.
That's right, yeah. So in this case, their sailing vessel ran aground or it touched the bottom. And in this case, it was probably stranded, which is a very bad situation for a boat to be in. It can either easily get toppled, it can start taking on water. And that's one of those instances where it's a perfect example of use of the beacon to indicate distress and have people come help you out.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so yes, we do have some questions here. So Carrie wants to know, are these the same devices that help people who are caught in an avalanche?
They could be, but no, in most cases, the avalanche devices, and I'm actually a snowboarder myself, but those are special beacons that are more local. They only work for smaller distances. And these beacons are a higher power so that they can get up to the satellites, and it's a different frequency that our satellites are listening for just these beacons.
Great. Texas wants to know, how do people get a beacon?
So these are all available at commercial stores, REI, online. You can, they range in price. The handheld ones are about $200 and more, depending on the features that they have. The ones that are specially made for boats and airplanes tend to be a little bit more expensive. The boat ones actually have brackets so that if the boat was sinking, it would actually detect the water and release the beacon so it can go up and still continue to transmit even if the boat goes down. But yeah, you can get them online or you can get them at other retail stores.
So for Mrs. Harai's class and on the Big Island, so if the beacon falls in the water, it floats, right?
That's right. That's one of the main differences that the the EPIRBs, or the boat beacons, have to float. Some of the PLBs do as well, but the EPIRBs are specially designed to float and continue to transmit well, even when they're floating.
Okay, let's see. There's a lot of questions coming in, Jesse. This is a popular topic.
Right.
Kevin wants to know, are there certain areas of the globe that have dead spots? Like, are there gaps in coverage?
No, so we showed the video there of the polar satellites, and in some cases there might be delays, but there's, I didn't get into it, there's also the geo satellites that I think Chris mentioned. Those can also detect them, and they have coverage almost over the entire globe. And we also have a new system that uses the same satellites as the GPS system. So there's many satellites that are in view of that beacon in all points of the Earth at all times. So that's also part of the international aspect of the program, where we work with other countries to send data to them if we happen to detect a beacon in their area. And likewise, they work with us.
I apologize, Jesse, if you already answered this, but Danny wanted to know, did you talk about how expensive those beacons are and the shelf life for them?
I mentioned it a little bit, but I can go into it more. The handhelds are the least expensive, about $200, which is, still very pricey, but there's no subscription fees. Once you buy it, it will work for at least 5 years. They're certified to work for at least that. It could be 10, and most manufacturers offer some type of battery replacement service. So you can send them your beacon and they will replace the battery for you, and it'll work again for another 5 or 10 years. And the EPIRB there that Chris is holding, and he's demonstrating how you need to move that thing over to prevent false alerts. But that EPIRB or ones like that are typically $500 or $600 or $700, again, depending on the features and where you're buying it at.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask all of our panelists to turn their cameras back on, because I've been accumulating some questions that are kind of for each of you that we didn't get to in your individual sections. So we're going to do that now. Eleanor had a question that I had the first time I watched your video, and I don't know whether Greg or Chris wants to take this, but why is it so dark in those rooms?
Good question. Well, it's usually by satellite controller choice too. If we had it very bright and somebody wanted to dim the lights, it would be a little bit harder. But at their individual stations, they can increase the ambient light to suit their needs, and also see good contrast on the screens if they need to, especially on the product area where they're looking at images and maybe need to look at finer detail. So usually it's preference by the satellite controllers, and it's easier to bring in more light than try to increase darkness. Great question.
Well, I think Delcy thought that maybe most of our building is underground. Is that true?
Actually, most of the facility is on the first floor. It's pretty expansive. I think probably 80 to 90% of the people are on the first floor, but no, it's not underground. It's basically the parking is underground, but the main facility is about 80% occupancy, and then the third floor is computers. Fourth and fifth floor are for the operations staff and the other teams as well. So, yep, great question.
Yeah, I think the picture from the front, you can't tell exactly how big the building is.
Yeah, it's on the other. Most of it's on the other side, so it's not a good perspective. Yeah.
Okay. So Ingrid is asking. This is for Ellen, our volcano expert. They want to know if you worked on the eruption of Mount Vesuvius.
I did not. I was not alive for the major eruption of Vesuvius. One of the largest eruptions in recent times has been Mount St. Helens, but even that predates me. That was in the early 80s. So the Fuego eruption, where you all guessed the red dot, the very last poll question, that's one of the larger eruptions that I've worked on in my career, which has been about 10 years now, working in the Volcano Center.
Great. Let's see. Derek wants to ask if do you also monitor radioactivity from volcano lightning? Is volcano lightning a thing?
Volcano lightning is a thing, but it's not something that we monitor. We're limited to monitoring and reporting on volcanic ash. That's our mandate in the realm of aviation safety. But yes, some eruptions can be so explosive and reach so high in the atmosphere that they actually generate lightning.
Wow, that's cool. I can tell Greg's feeling left out, so I'm going to give him some hard questions. Let's see. So a number of folks asked, what kind of background or classes would you take if you wanted to help work on satellites? What do you need to know to be in NSA?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a lot of, you need to take a lot of math and science. We have people with all kinds of different degrees here and various engineering. We have meteorologists, the people studying the weather. Like Chris is a meteorologist. We still let him operate the satellites, even though he's a meteorologist. Ellen's a meteorologist too, I believe. So, and Jesse, I don't, what was your degree then? Okay. So actually, I came from computer science and started out in all just building all the systems to operate the satellites, but worked with satellites all my career. So just about any kind of physical science or engineering, and you can get trained and be working in satellites.
Great. Okay, let's see. Since Chris put up the first school bus question, maybe you can tell us, Natalie would like to know, what is NOAA's biggest satellite?
The biggest satellite would probably be the GOES-R series satellite. So it goes east and west. As we saw in the one picture, you saw the individual in the clean room next to the solar array, and you could see a very good perspective. So that's, the satellite's almost bigger than a school bus itself, and then the solar array or panel extends much further than that. So it's very big satellite. But in the future, they'll probably be smaller and smaller when they move to small sats and CubeSats. So you'll see miniaturization probably in the next 10, 15 years. Great question.
Yeah, I think we should probably, when you're talking about those satellites and all the data that comes in, maybe we could mention the ground engineering team and all the folks that are supporting that. Do you want to talk about that for a second, Chris?
Oh, sure. As Greg mentioned, there's a lot of study involved, and as he mentioned, we have a lot of engineers supporting what we call the ground systems, and we have a number of data acquisition stations, Fairbanks and Wallops, Virginia, which is near Chincoteague, Virginia, and also internationally too. So Svalbard Island, and actually the South Pole as well. And there's a number of those sites that actually we can transmit to the satellites and collect the data from the various satellites. And then we have information technology folks too, administrative people. It's a big group that has to basically manage, operate, support over 16 satellites that we currently operate today. And then in December, we're going to add our 17th satellite once that launches in December. So it's a big enterprise, very large group of people. So we certainly need new people to come and help us. So study hard.
Good plug. I just realized I hadn't had my camera on that whole time, so sorry about giving you questions from the void. So we're basically at time, but let me give you just a few last minute questions. So we do have a lot of questions about satellites, so I want to refer people to Tim Walsh's NOAA Live webinar, which was a little while back, but there's a lot more information about stationary satellites and polar satellites and the different aspects of our satellite constellation. I think the big question that a few people asked, Christina asked it most recently in the chat, but what happens if the power goes out?
So we have, with satellite operations, we have a lot of redundancy in power. So we have backup generators, more than enough to meet the need, UPSs, which is uninterrupted power supplies that are batteries that can take over the load. And then we also have backup sites too. So if this facility was rendered inoperable, we would send our teams immediately to the backup sites, which are in various places in Fairmont, West Virginia, in Wallops Island in Virginia, and also a team would have to go to Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado to run that satellite program. So we have so much redundancy built in as a contingency or a backup plan if something bad or unforeseen were to happen. That's usually how we handle that. Great question.
Yeah, and the people were also concerned about those beacons, Jesse. You know, what happens if your beacon breaks or if you can't afford a beacon? You know, I think our audience is very concerned about safety. So I was just curious if you had any response to that.
So I think you know, it just goes to the importance of the beacons being well made. They do have good instructions about how to keep them properly. So, you know, you don't accidentally set it off while it's in your backpack or something like that. Yeah, it's just important to make sure that that beacon is ready. It offers a test feature. So if you're ready to go on an excursion or something, you can actually press the button. It will run a test internally and transmit and send a self-test, just one burst, just to make sure that everything is working. So you also have the ability to verify that it is still functioning properly.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Well, I'm sorry that we couldn't get to more questions today. There were a lot. If anyone has a lingering one, you can always send it to me and I'll route it to one of these fine NOAA colleagues. He'll try to get an answer for you. Thank you so much for sharing your lives with us at NOAA and this big 24/7 operation that you guys are such a critical piece of. That's really important to everyone, and we're so grateful for your service. We also want to remind everybody that next week we continue our open house series, and we're going to Santa Cruz, California. We're going to talk to you about the Monterey Bay Exploration Center there. So that's going to be a bit different than today's. So get your bathing suit on for that one. We're going to do some water work next week. All right, thank you guys very much. It was great. We had a great time, and we'll see everyone next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.